Hey guys, it's Matt here from ARC Transportation, here to give you guys a market update, and I'm joined with our domestic operations manager, Tom Morgenstern.
Hello, hello.
Hey Tom, good to have you.
Thanks.
And of course, Andrew Hurst.
Yep. How you doing, Matt?
Doing well. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
Doing good? Awesome. Well, we wanted to get in front of the camera and give you guys an update on what we're seeing in the market and what we should expect as shippers moving into these summer months. It's obviously been pretty tumultuous really since COVID began, so the last 2.5 years.
And it hasn't gotten any better, honestly. No. Like if we're, I don't want to spoiler alert, it hasn't got any better.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's shocking because I think everybody's been trying to predict a little bit on what's going to happen, and really right now I feel like we're kind of at a very low spot as far as before the shipping was bad, but now we've been caught up with this inflation and a lot of different economic factors that are happening. So I want to ask you guys about a couple different modes here, and maybe you guys can give me a quick update on what's happening and maybe some tips that shippers can have for navigating at least the next 3 months or so.
Sounds good.
So let's start with LTL, Tom.
LTL.
Can you give me a capacity update on what's happening in the LTL world?
Yeah, I guess just in LTL in general right now, we're still having a capacity crunch, right? Carriers are still reaching their limits. Some facilities are still backlogged throughout the United States and in different areas. So we still haven't gotten back to normal. I don't know if we actually going to see normal again from what we were. I think there's going to have to be a lot of change in the industry of how things are shipped to see LTL maybe have capacity how we used to think it. So yeah, it's different from how we had it before. I would say going forward now with it, we're seeing more so just people, not enough people in the companies, in the warehousing. That's creating the capacity issues. And of course the truckers, right? We need truck drivers, and there's not as many of them that are wanting to do that type of run. They want more money in long runs instead of local LTL type of stuff.
So Matt, we've talked about this in the past in other videos, but the LTL carriers are still in the driver's seat for the most part.
Yeah.
While we're starting to see some rate structures come down a little bit in terms of they're offering some discounts, whereas maybe 8 months ago they were like, hey, we can't even enter a negotiation. They're entering certain negotiations. They're still favoring the LTL carrier significantly. And that comes specifically because the tariffs are becoming more granular. And while aspects of a tariff, there always had aspects of tariffs in place that maybe never got hit, and I'll let Tom talk in a minute about the detention time or wait time of these drivers as one major area, but we're seeing a lot of those types of sections in the tariff that never were never used before or never acted upon
or enforced.
That's a great word. That's what I was looking. That's the word I was looking for. Enforced. Now you're seeing them obviously be enforced at a greater detail with very little grace. It's just kind of like it is what it is. So with that, Tom,
it's based on their ELDs really. So it's like when the driver checks in and says, "Hey, I'm here."
In regard to detention time.
In regard to detention time, at the shipper or even at the delivery. Now we're seeing both areas where it's like, "Hey, I check in, and not until I'm completely offloaded, I check back out, and that time is just automatically put in, and that's how it's billed." So we're seeing no discrepancy, right? They're like, sorry, this is what we show the time the driver was there and out. And
so the shippers are footing this bill, obviously.
Shippers, whoever the bill to is on the bill is going to be footing this bill. We've seen sometimes where third party has been the bill to, but the actual facility of the shipper actually has been billed directly if they have an account with that carrier. Separately from the actual BOL. So we've seen them go both ways, I guess, in that regard.
Well, I've heard actually carriers firing customers too now because of this detention time, because they're on such tight schedules that if they're getting caught up every time they're going to pick up, they've basically been coming to customers saying, hey, if we can't speed up this pickup or delivery, we just won't service you anymore, which is pretty wild.
I would say LTL is definitely, they distinguish a time frame that each stop should be, and when you start going past that capacity and or that time frame, it's not going to be worthwhile for them as a customer, especially if they're only picking up one skid or dropping off one skid. If they have to wait 30 minutes for you to do that, they're going to just say it's not worth our time. And I think that's where we're getting into logistics, where people are saying it's not worth my time. I'm not going to do this for you. And then shippers are left out in the open. They don't know what to do. If they've used that same carrier for years, then they're searching for something new.
Yeah. So what's something that shippers could do to
real quick before we jump in there, I almost look at this as like a watershed moment in logistics in our industry, because we're out of the pandemic. Inflation is going up. We have all these like downward pressures on the market. Yet if you look at logistics, it's still constrained, right? Because with logistics, every macro event really affects logistics. So, COVID in China, lockdown in China, it's affecting logistics, right? So people are looking saying, oh, we've got capacity, but that capacity is really just blank capacity because China hasn't been able to ship for whatever, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or they haven't been shipping at their typical volumes. So I really look at this as almost like a watershed moment of, LTL has kind of put their feet in the sand and been like, okay, or drawn their line, whatever, really, really dug in and said, we're not going to change. We're not going to go back to the way it was. We made up so much ground over the last 24 months. We're not going to give up that ground back to the shippers. There's no benefit to them. And you can look at pretty much across the board. You can look at their public filings. If they're a public company, they've all done phenomenal. So they're now judging themselves, and the markets are now going to judge them into the future how they did based on 21, 22, or 20 and 21 in those years. So to get to your point, like what can a shipper do? We talk about this all the time, right? It's partnerships, right? And it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, sure, partnerships. But really, when you're building your tariff out, when you're building, okay, what is important to me, understanding the other side of it, what do they want? So think about what the other person wants, or what the other partner wants. Okay, I want to be able to get in and out of your building quickly. Make changes to your internal operation. Bring in a supply chain specialist, for a quick consultation and say, okay, change how this is done, or change how you pick, or delay the outbound a day to where it's all staged. There's a million different ways you can do stuff. That internal processes can affect how you're being charged from the LTL carrier.
So make yourself more attractive as a shipper.
We've talked about this in the podcast a whole bunch, right? Even down to how you pack your freight. When they look at your freight, they're like, man, this is going to be a pain to deal with. I gotta.
Is it desirable or not?
Is it exactly?
And for them, they have parameters that they say, hey, I don't want that.
So ask them.
Yeah.
So literally just be like, what makes my freight more desirable? Exactly. How do I make my freight more desirable for you guys?
Yeah.
And while it might feel like you're giving them the upper hand in negotiations, they already have the upper hand. Like your volume.
They could choose not to pick up.
Yeah, your volume is the days of being like, oh, I'm a big shipper is a lot less. In fact, just yesterday I was reading the Wall Street Journal, a huge shipper. They do truckload LTL. They're starting the bankruptcy process. And I can tell you, all the carriers that participate in there, they don't care how much freight you have. They're going to say it's just not worth the risk. Sorry. I mean, sorry about you. It stinks that you're not going to be able to move your goods, but I'm also not going to take on the risk or liability of moving for a company that may go into bankruptcy and not be able to pay their bill. Whereas in the past, you'd see a lot of carriers, they'd see the opportunity out there and they might run after the golden goose, and that's just not the case anymore.
And just to plug us real quick, because I don't know if a lot of people know that we do supply chain solutions. A lot of times people just look at us as shippers, which is fine too. We can do that, but we do have teams that can help companies get their freight out quicker, help them internally. Like you said, there's internal processes, kind of look at those and really take a measured approach to say, okay, how do we keep or reduce our wait time for trucks? How do we get everything lining up, running smoothly like a well-oiled machine, right? So that when carriers come in, they come in, pick up, and go out as they're supposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the reason why we have that division is because our customers have asked us for it. Like, we don't necessarily like shout it from the rooftop. We're kind of just like, we've been doing this for such a long time. We have such good relationships with carriers. We know what they want. We know what they need. And therefore, we typically can provide a lot of insight into shipping departments.
Yeah, we've seen the constraints, right? Yeah. From years of doing it and knowing exactly, like, hey, maybe you're not looking at the full scope of this, right? Because you specialize in this, right? You specialize in making this and all this, but this is what we specialize in. And sometimes it's worth talking to a specialist. All
right, let's move on to talk about diesel prices, truckload. We know that at the pump, prices are up right now for the average American 45%, gas prices. And use of diesel for truckers is up 75% this year, which is an all-time high. It's obviously getting more expensive to ship truckload. Is this a time where we should maybe look at, is rail going to help solve this at all?
Well, first part of your question about fuel, was it, I think about 2 weeks ago they came out, the fuel index, published. They said the average trucker, it's costing them an average of now 24 cents per mile they drive more based on the fuel prices. I think it was based off of March or mid-April. So the reality is, if you're a shipper or you're a driver, right, the cost is real. It's not like some fake made up number like, oh, fuel's costing a lot. It's a reality where every single mile you drive is costing you now a quarter more if you're a typical, truck fully loaded. So it's very real. As far as the rail question, Matt, we don't see any available capacity on the rails. Historically, it has never been beneficial. If you're built out in the truck world, like in the in the full truckload world, rarely do we see a major benefit putting it on the rail unless you've already done that. So LTL already does that, right? They load their 53s, they put them on the rail and it goes. The delays we have seen in rail have been unbelievable over the last year and a half, really. I mean, you've got imports crushing it on the West Coast. You've got basically every port's filled and they all run off of rail. And to where most rail is not, they're not accepting new contracts. And they're just, they haven't been able to alleviate any of the actual road congestion or cost simply because they don't have capacity.
And I think down the line too, of like when you come to, if you can get it to the final destination terminals, like the delivery of that is still delayed because of the driver capacity of being able to get it out of the yard. So I don't ever see it as necessarily a complete switch, right? You're not going to just be like, hey, I did it this way. You would have to have an excessive amount of capacity for it to make sense.
You'd have to have an incredible demand where it would make sense, number one, and number two, where you'd find any sort of cost benefit. That's I think the biggest thing is right? The cost benefit. You might be able to find capacity, but the cost would just blow you out of the water. There'd be no benefit for you to do it when you look at it from a P&L standpoint.
Gotcha.
And a lot of times, depending on if you're not really close to an actual terminal or like a facility, you have to truck it to that facility. So you're already spending costs at a premium just to get it there and then get it across. So it's whatever you're doing rail. Have
you compared any truckload to rail rates recently?
Yeah, it was almost like, we were doing one quote where we had, it was almost a wash, right? A truckload was probably even cheaper to run 4 truckloads than to put it all on rail. So there's a huge, times where you think
in the
it's
timing.
In the
timing. The rail's going to take 14 days. Trucks 4 or 5, whatever.
Yeah, maybe 3. When it was coming. So when you look at it, you're like, well, do I spend equivalent amount of money or maybe a little bit less and get it, 3 times, 4 times faster?
Most people are going to want the speed of service.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, because we're in a crunch, right? We've always had in the last few years, specifically in COVID, we've our inventory has been low. So the last thing you want to do is lock up your inventory on a rail and you don't know when you're going to get it. So that's the biggest thing too right now.
So I guess then that, just to reiterate something else we've talked about in the past, but if you're a shipper, one of the ways you can help not hurt yourself in truckload is to reduce the amount of brokers you use, right? So you're not competing against yourself. Some people think, hey, I just spread it out to more brokers and that'll help me get a better rate. Well, the truck drivers know that it's the same load and you end up bidding against yourself.
In many ways. And the other thing is as a broker, what's going on too. So as a broker, loads come in and you see them on the board because everybody's posting on the same board for the most part. So you see them on the board. Sometimes they have internal networks and you don't see them, but a lot of times you'll see them on the board and you'll say, okay, well they're just shopping around for the best rate. I'm not gonna put all my efforts into this one customer because it's not the relationship that most people want to get into. So typically, if a shipper does engage with a broker, they should probably keep that circle pretty tight, so that they know. And even if a broker knows, hey, I'm being compared to 2 other brokers, they're fine with that. They understand the game. But if you just see them just sending it out to 70 people, you're a lot less inclined to be racing to get that load because that somebody's always going to shave off another $5 or $10 or $20 to try to get that load. And in a race to the bottom, very, very few people ever win. Even the shipper will not win because they will get the lowest quality of service usually out of that price.
Yeah.
Real quick to touch on international ocean and air, it's a lot of the same what we've seen. There is a little bit more capacity on the air side than we've seen in the past. Ocean, while bookings have gone down, so sailings and bookings have gone down dramatically since we've seen basically the East, Asia areas, we've seen the bookings go down because of COVID. They've got incredible lockdowns. So instead of making that capacity available, they're just canceling the ships. The goal, obviously, is to keep margins up, keep costs up. And ocean, like the actual cost of ocean bookings have gone up, I think something like 7 times over the last maybe 2 years.
Yeah,
from
last 18 months.
Yeah, 18 months,
yeah.
And the issue with that is the ocean lines don't want that to drop. They want to if anything, they want to increase that if they can. So what they're doing is they're just blanking shippings to where even if you have a container that's scheduled to ship on a specific day, they'll just say, we're canceling that ship. It's not going.
And they just keep rolling it over.
And they just keep rolling these containers. So we're having these massive backups at these ports, especially out of China, Asia, multiple areas in Asia, that's causing this, going to be causing this compounding issue, because then what's going to happen is everyone starts, beginning of summer, everyone starts ordering for Christmas.
Yeah.
And you're going to have this big wave where they're going to be able to keep the costs up, whether it's artificial or whether it really costs. I mean, it's a commodity, so it's a supply and demand curve. People are going to want it. They're going to be willing to pay for it, and that's just the nature of logistics. And then when you look at air, air capacity, it's increased, but that's a lot to do with passengers have started to fly again. And so you're seeing...
Mostly in the domestic side, though.
Absolutely, mostly in the domestic side. Europe's obviously having some struggles, right, with just how flights have changed. But yeah, we're seeing it opening up a little bit in the air. Not so much in the price, though. I mean, the price has stayed pretty solid over the last... It hasn't changed all that much. So again, it's a supply and demand curve, and right now there's no reason for the capacity to reduce the value that
they're going to keep that price high as long as they can. Too,
I think for air, though, particularly, they just didn't have as many flights going. And the cost hasn't really changed in that regard. It's just they've just now increasing flights here, to give you more capacity to get into cities quicker, and that's going to be the difference.
And I think that there was we're up 70-ish%, approximately 70% in terms of over last year, in terms of growth, in terms of actual flights being flown. But that still is a 46% deficit over what we were doing in 2019. So there is still a big gap for where we need to get to kind of get back to pre-pandemic levels. But the nice part is, 70-ish, whatever, 75%, that's a good chunk in the right direction. So hopefully through the rest of the year, we'll continue to build volume, build capacity, availability to where we'll be able to see, typical volumes available to shippers again.
So what should shippers do the rest of this year? Obviously, they need to plan ahead. They need to understand that what they've seen is not changing soon, even though, like you said, we're seeing the pandemic end. But these constraints are going to be still on us for the year. So to plan ahead.
Yeah, I'd say plan ahead, and it all depends on what they want to do, right? If Christmas time they're wanting to bring out new products, right? It changes their complete new thing. Like it's a new shipping, quantity or new shipping sizes and all their stuff. They definitely want to plan ahead to see how they're going to be able to fulfill that. Because right now, depending on what the size is, you have limitations on how you want to do it, or the cost is greatly increased. We were talking about LTL earlier. Over length in all this size, they're increasing it drastically over the last 18 to 24 months, where in some carriers they just won't accept it, but others will say, hey, we'll accept it, but it's going to be an extra $1,000 no matter what the weight is. So
talk to your providers. What I'm hearing, talk to your logistics providers. If you have something new coming up,
bring them in as early as possible.
Yeah.
Your product development team, bring them in as early as possible. If you have a trusted source, or like we talked about, supply chain consulting, if somebody has a question, bring somebody in to answer that question, because it can mean a massive difference, even how you pack it. So if you're like, oh, we're going to do flat pack furniture couches, we're going to deliver the couch in parcel space, it's great, but understand that the size of some of those boxes are going to cost an incredible dollar amount when you try to deliver those. Yeah. So it's always better to try to bring people in that are knowledgeable about it ahead of time if you're bringing a new product to the market.
Gotcha.
Especially if you're trying to figure out the final bottom dollar, what you want to sell it for.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
Gotcha. Great. So Tom, Andrew, thank you guys so much for jumping on here
Absolutely.
today. If you guys have any questions, you guys need any help, of course, reach out to the ARC team. We're always happy to help. Thanks so much for watching. Again, have a great day.